The heat off the tarmac shimmered like glass, bending the air above the runway and painting the horizon in a restless blur. The naval base at Coronado was alive with noise boots striking in cadence, the dull thud of rotor blades in the distance, instructors barking commands over the surf that crashed somewhere beyond the steel fences. The transport truck hissed to a stop near the firing range, brakes sighing like a beast settling into rest. From the back, a figure emerged, Lieutenant Commander Elena Ward. Her uniform was regulation, sharp, sleeves pressed to a knife's edge, ribbons precisely aligned. The only break in the perfection was the quiet times, thunk times of carbon fiber against metal as her crutches struck the deck. The sound carried. Heads turned. A dozen recruits, sunburned and raw from the last week of BUD divided by S, paused mid-conversation. The sight of her, a senior officer, not limping but moving with deliberate, measured purpose, didn't fit in the rhythm of their world. Strength here was loud, muscular, unflinching. Hers was quiet, mechanical, unnerving. She didn't flinch beneath their stares. She didn't need to. The air around her seemed to harden just by her presence. Medical transfer, one recruit muttered under his breath, a smirk curling in the corner of his mouth. Another laughed softly, the kind of laugh that looks for approval. Guess they're running out of fit instructors. The others chuckled too, a pack instinct too strong to resist. They didn't mean harm, they just didn't know better. Not yet. Elena's eyes flicked toward them, one slow sweep that didn't linger long enough to be confrontation, but long enough to be remembered. Her crutches caught the light, a matte black composite, reinforced at the joints, built for endurance, not pity. She didn't hide the prosthetic that gleamed above her left boot. The scars above it were visible, old and healed into pale ridges that looked almost deliberate, like the etching of a map. She crossed the deck with the steady rhythm of someone who had learned that balance is just another form of defiance. Every movement was functional, economical, shaped by repetition and pain and time. The instructors at the gate saluted. She returned it, brief, perfect, unhesitating. Inside the control office, Commander Dyer watched her approach through the blinds, jaw tight. He'd been told little, just that she'd been reassigned by direct request from the upper chain, no explanations given. The kind of transfer that carried silence like a shadow. 3 years ago, Elena Ward had led Operation Harbinger, an off-the-record rescue in the Gulf. The official report said a transport vessel was lost to explosion. The unofficial story said she carried 2 wounded men through 40 meters of flame and shrapnel before the deck gave out beneath her. They found her floating on a debris panel hours later, unconscious, one leg gone below the knee. She woke up to a medal she didn't want and orders she didn't understand. And now 3 years later she was back on active soil, the word instructor attached to her file like a rumor nobody dared confirm. The young SEALs didn't know any of that. All they saw was a woman on crutches. To them, she was an anomaly, an interruption in the myth of invincibility they'd been fed since day one. They didn't see the weight distribution in her shoulders, the control in her grip, the way she scanned every angle of the range as if marking wind direction and bullet drift without thinking. As she reached the training bay, one of the recruits, a broad-shouldered Texan named Rourke, whispered just loud enough for his friends to hear. "Probably here to give us a lecture on resilience." More laughter. Elena stopped. Slowly, she turned her head toward him. Her gaze was calm, almost soft. That quiet kind of calm that makes men forget how to breathe. She said nothing, just stared for a heartbeat too long. Then she moved again, her crutches tapping in perfect rhythm, the carbon tip striking the steel plate at the range's edge with a metallic times clink asterisk. The sound lingered, sharp and deliberate. By the time she passed the observation booth, the recruits were silent. The laughter had died not from guilt, but from uncertainty. She didn't correct them, didn't defend herself, didn't explain. And somehow, that silence carried more weight than any reprimand. Later that night, when her file was finally pulled in the instructor's office, Dyer frowned at the redacted lines, the security clearance tags, the line that simply read, Asterisk Operational Advisor, Joint Command Authorization, asterisk. He looked out the window toward the range, where Elena was still there under the floodlights. Balancing on her crutches while cleaning her weapon one-handed, the recruits had gone. The ocean wind cut across the deck, tugging at her hair, and for a brief moment, Dyer understood why Command hadn't told them who she was. Some lessons aren't taught through words. They're walked across steel, one deliberate step at a time. The morning heat shimmered off the sand berms, distorting the horizon into waves of trembling light. Brass shells glinted under the sun like scattered coins, kicked by boots as the trainees cycled through their firing drills. Each rifle report cracked through the still air, sharp and rhythmic, echoing across the Coronado Range. The smell of salt and gunpowder mixed into something metallic and alive. Sweat rolled down necks, gloves creaked, orders barked, and then, like a ripple through an otherwise steady surface, silence rolled in as Lieutenant Commander Elena Ward made her entrance. She was late, deliberately so. The recruits were already lined up, rifles slung, stance wide, their movements uniform and mechanical. Elena's steps broke that rhythm, instantly metal striking gravel, the soft compression of carbon fiber against the ground. 2 crutches. The whisper started before she even reached the firing line. Someone muttered something about pity assignments. Another said it louder. Guess Command needed to fill a quota. The laughter was low, like the kind of sound that didn't expect consequences. Elena didn't flinch. She set her crutches against the nearest bench with the quiet precision of someone trained to remove all excess noise from motion. The rifle she unpacked was standard issue, but the way her hands moved over it wasn't. Every adjustment was intentional, cheek rest lowered, sight realigned by fractions, magazine clicked in with soft finality. She worked with the cool patience of someone calibrating an instrument, not just a weapon. "Need a hand, ma'am?" a recruit called out. His grin was all teeth, too young to know how fragile arrogance really was. Elena looked up at him once, just once, and then looked back down at her rifle. No words, no expression. The kind of silence that starts to make people uncomfortable without knowing why. Another voice, sharper this time. Shouldn't she be at medical, not tactical? That earned a few more laughs, some nervous, some genuine. The instructors nearby said nothing. They'd been told to observe, not interfere. Elena stepped forward, her stance steady despite the uneven ground. She balanced the rifle against her shoulder, body perfectly aligned, breathing slow. The wind cut across the range, tugging at her sleeves. The flag at the far end flicked once. The targets flipped. Her first shot cracked through the stillness. Then another. And another. 12 rounds. 12 hits. Each one center mass. No hesitation. No wasted movement. No second guessing. The groupings were surgical clean holes, clustered like the work of a machine that didn't know error. The sound of her firing rhythm wasn't like the others. It was consistent, efficient, mathematical. When the last casing hit the ground, the range was silent. Not because of protocol, not because of fear, because disbelief has no sound. Elena ejected the magazine, caught it midair, slid in another. Her right hand shifted down, her left reached for the crutch beside her. She hooked it into place against her side, resting it under her arm. Then, without breaking form, she lifted the rifle again, left-handed this time. The recruits exchanged looks. Some smirked, thinking it was showmanship. Others just watched, quiet now. She fired again, controlled bursts. The recoil met the brace of her crutch, absorbed through carbon and muscle and sheer intent. Every shot found the center ring. Instructors began to drift closer, silent, trying to reconcile what they were seeing with what they'd assumed. By the time the targets lowered, there were 24 holes, each one within an inch of the last. Elena lowered the rifle, checked the chamber, cleared it with practiced ease. She didn't look at the men behind her. She didn't need to. Her silence carried further than any reprimand. Somewhere down the line, Recruit Rourke muttered, "No way she just did that." His voice didn't carry confidence anymore. It carried uncertainty, the first crack in the wall of bravado. The instructor nearest him said nothing, just scribbled something in a notebook. Elena reattached her crutches, picked them up, and began walking off the range. The metallic rhythm of her steps echoed softly, measured, deliberate, no limp, no pause. Just a cadence that felt like resolve carved into sound. As she passed the line of recruits, they parted instinctively, not out of respect, not yet, but out of something closer to unease. A quiet understanding that the person they'd mocked wasn't here to prove herself. She already had. At the far end of the range, Instructor Cole watched her from behind dark lenses, arms crossed. He'd seen thousands of shooters, some flawless, some gifted, most forgettable. But not this. There was no hesitation in her aim, no performative flourish. Only purpose. A pattern he recognized but couldn't quite place. Elena never looked back. The sun caught on the steel pins of her prosthetic as she stepped off the gravel and onto the asphalt. The sound of her crutches faded into the wind, replaced by whispers the kind that would grow into stories by nightfall. By then, the recruits would realize the truth that had been standing in front of them all along. She wasn't there to be an example. She was there to remind them that skill has nothing to do with symmetry. The next morning broke with the kind of clarity that only came after a storm. The wind had shifted overnight, sweeping the range clean of yesterday's spent shells, leaving behind the faint metallic tang of brass and salt. The recruits assembled early, tension humming low between them. Nobody said her name, but everyone knew who the whispers were about. A disabled officer had outshot half the team, and the rumor carried faster than any official report. Elena Ward arrived at her usual pace, steady, even, deliberate. The rhythm of her crutches struck the concrete in two precise beats, echoing in the still air like a metronome counting down to something none of them could name. The instructors spoke in hushed tones near the control shed, glancing toward the range entrance every few seconds. A convoy of black SUVs had just pulled up by the command building, engines idling. No one knew why, but protocol dictated silence. Then the doors opened, and a man stepped out. Three-star General Marcus Hale didn't need introduction. His reputation walked ahead of him. Every SEAL on that base had read his name on at least one case study, the kind of missions that never made the news but shaped doctrine for a decade. Hale had the posture of someone who carried weight long enough to forget it was there. His uniform was crisp, sleeves rolled just once, eyes hidden behind weathered shades that reflected the training grounds like glass. He didn't bring an entourage, he didn't need one. When he stepped onto the range, the recruits snapped to attention. Their boots struck the ground in a sharp, synchronized thud that cracked through the silence. Hale walked the line slowly, inspecting faces, gear, posture. He stopped once to correct a rifle stance and kept moving. The click of his boots on the gravel was almost rhythmic, like a slow heartbeat cutting through the wind. Then, he reached her. Elena didn't salute right away. She waited until his shadow crossed hers, then raised her hand in a crisp, regulation-perfect motion. He returned it with equal precision, his gaze moving briefly from her face to the brace at her leg. No expression, just observation. The recruits watched, frozen in curiosity and unease. Hale's silence stretched longer than was comfortable. He glanced at her weapon on the bench, a custom-adjusted rifle with a modified trigger housing and a carbon sling attachment. Then, without a word, he stepped back 2 paces, bent slightly, and rolled up his pant leg. The sound of the fabric lifting was barely audible, but the effect was seismic. The recruits stared, wide-eyed, as he revealed a carbon fiber brace strapped tight around his left knee. Matte black, same model, same design family as Elena's. The silence deepened, heavy and electric. When he spoke, his voice was low, steady, the kind that carried through noise without rising. "You don't measure a soldier by what they've lost," he said, his gaze sweeping across the line, "but by what they refused to give up." No one moved, no one breathed. Then Hale picked up a rifle from the rack, checked the chamber, and nodded once toward Elena. It wasn't an order, it was an invitation. She moved to the firing line beside him, the recruits instinctively clearing the space. 2 shooters, 2 scars made visible, 2 reasons to be underestimated. The targets flipped. Hale raised his rifle with practiced ease, movement efficient and fluid. Elena mirrored him, balancing against her crutch, the weapon aligned perfectly to her shoulder. The wind gusted, carrying grit across the range. For a moment, the world held still. Then came the sound. 2 sets of shots, alternating, overlapping. His rhythm deep, methodical, hers faster, sharper, a precise staccato that filled the gaps between his. Together, they formed a pattern that wasn't competition but harmony. Brass shells danced on the gravel. The smell of gunpowder thickened, heavy and raw. When the last round fired, the echo rolled out over the bay and vanished into the surf beyond the dunes. When the smoke cleared, the targets at the far end told the story. 2 groups, different trajectories, identical accuracy. The center of each target was torn clean through. Hale lowered his weapon, ejected the magazine, and placed it gently on the bench. He turned to Elena, offered the faintest nod, a small gesture, but in military language, it was a paragraph. She returned it, her face unreadable except for the flicker of something private, like respect forged in silence. The general turned to the recruits. "You will forget my name before you forget this moment," he said simply. "And that's the point." Then he left the range as quietly as he'd arrived, his convoy pulling away in silence. The trainees stood motionless, rifles limp in their hands. The sun was climbing higher, the air thick with heat, yet no one moved to wipe the sweat from their brow. They were still staring at the 2 sets of targets, one belonging to a general, one to a woman on crutches, and realizing, perhaps for the first time, that strength doesn't always stand the way they'd been taught. When Elena turned to leave, no one dared look away. The rhythm of her crutches sounded different now. Not mechanical, not fragile, just earned. The sun hung low over Coronado, burning the horizon in streaks of orange and brass. The air still carried the smell of spent powder, a ghost of the morning's fire. The range was quiet now, save for the faint ringing in the ears of those who had stood there when it happened, the moment that rewrote their understanding of strength. The final shot still seemed to hang in the air, suspended in memory, an echo that refused to fade. General Marcus Hale left the firing line without ceremony. No handshake, no speech, just that same deliberate walk, boots crunching against gravel. As he passed Elena, he gave a single nod, barely perceptible, but heavy with recognition. She returned it, her hand resting lightly on her rifle, eyes steady. It was an exchange that carried no hierarchy, no decorum, only understanding. When he reached the edge of the range, the convoy was already waiting. Doors opened, orders murmured. He stepped inside without looking back. The engines started, and the line of black vehicles rolled away, sunlight catching briefly on the tinted glass before they disappeared beyond the gates. Then, silence. The recruits stood rooted in place, weapons slack at their sides. Nobody dared to speak. The ones who had mocked her now found their own words strange, meaningless. What could they possibly say that wouldn't sound hollow? The laughter from the day before seemed like it had come from a different lifetime. Elena gathered her crutches and moved slowly down the line. The sound of their contact with the ground was steady, rhythmic, no longer the mechanical beat of pity, but the cadence of discipline. The trainees straightened instinctively as she passed, their eyes following her but not daring to meet hers directly. Respect, the real kind, doesn't need volume, it just needs silence. By dusk, the range was empty. The ocean wind moved through the flags overhead, whispering through the tall grass along the perimeter fence. Somewhere in the maintenance shed, 2 crewmen worked under dim light, cleaning rifles and sweeping casings. They spoke in low voices about what they'd seen, about how the general hadn't said her name but didn't have to. Before they closed up for the night, One of them retrieved a brass plate from a storage bin and engraved a new inscription. The next morning, it was bolted beneath the Times Marksmanship Excellence Times wall in the main hall. It read, asterisk, she walked slower than most, but her bullets never did, asterisk. No one asked who ordered it, no one removed it. In the months that followed, Elena became more legend than presence. She trained quietly, observed occasionally, taught rarely, but when she did, every recruit listened like scripture. They called her times the still one, times behind her back, not in mockery, but reverence. Every shot she took in demonstration became a study in contradiction, grace bound to steel, silence harnessed as strength. Rumors spread across bases how a woman with one leg had outshot a three-star general, how a lesson in humility had been delivered without a single reprimand. The story changed with each retelling, as stories always do, but the core remained the same. Not about her rank, not about her scars, about her time's calm, asterisk. At night, new recruits would sit outside the barracks, watching the lights flicker across the distant range. Some said they saw her silhouette there, standing alone under the floodlights, rifle slung low across her shoulder, practicing in that endless patience that defined her. They'd whisper the line engraved on the plaque like a prayer, half myth, half motivation. Asterisk. She walked slower than most, but her bullets never did. Asterisk. By the end of that training cycle, no one joked about crutches. No one questioned what strength looked like. The instructors noticed a change in the rhythm of the place, fewer shouts, more focus, a strange kind of respect woven into the noise. Elena left the base before dawn one morning. No farewell, no send-off. Just the soft sound of carbon striking steel as she crossed the deck, the first light catching her shadow as it stretched long across the concrete. The sea breeze lifted her hair, and for a heartbeat she paused to look back at the range. The wind carried the faint clang of the flagpole like a muted salute. Then she turned and kept walking. When the next class arrived weeks later, they noticed the plaque almost immediately. Some paused to read it. Others ran their fingers along the engraving before heading out to train. None of them knew the full story, but they felt it etched into the culture, embedded in the silence between gunfire and command. Strength wasn't the stillness of the hands that aimed the weapon. It was the decision, made in pain and persistence, to lift it again,